Welcome to another episode of Assess That with Tom and Nat.
The podcast where we talk honestly about assessment, what works, what doesn't, and what actually helps students learn.
Each episode explores practical ideas, real classroom experiences, and the thinking behind sound assessment and grading practices.
Because when assessment is done well, it doesn't just measure learning, it shapes it.
All right, as we do.
As we must.
Let's check in. Here's today's question. What is the best? We're going to keep this on the professional side. What is the best piece of professional advice you've ever received?
Oh, it's actually something you told me.
Oh.
It's, you'll never get criticized by people doing better than you.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's a good one.
Yeah. And I still believe it. To this day, I think it's been a really critical thing to frame the feedback that sometimes comes your way.
Once you see it, you can't unsee it, right? When you realize where a lot of the criticism and the haters are coming from, you realize that's going on. For me, it's done is better than perfect.
Oh, that's a really good one.
Yeah, I like that one too. It is particularly important when, you're writing a manuscript or writing a book or doing a presentation. Like it's just, there's just being done is better than perfect, because ultimately through the editing process, et cetera, you can get there.
That makes good sense.
Yeah, it is a good one. So a big welcome back to returning listeners, and a big welcome to any new listeners joining us for the first time. And if you are new, you have an opportunity to join our Canadian Assessment Centre email list to stay up to date on all the things that we're doing. Some really exciting stuff. Our grading reform, which we're going to talk about today, Leadership Lab, we're talking about the Ambassadors Program. We'll get all of that information on the email list. So everyone who's either a new listener or a returning listener, we appreciate all of you.
We really do. And in today's episode, we're getting into the part of grading reform that no one really prepares you for, what it actually takes to lead it when things get hard. This isn't about changing grade books or policies, nothing like that. It's about navigating the tension, the pushback, and the uncertainty that comes with real change.
So we're going to unpack why so many well-intentioned efforts stall, and why it has less to do with the ideas and more to do with leadership. If you've ever felt caught in the middle of trying to move this work forward, this conversation is for you.
So that's today's plan. Let's get to it. There's a moment that almost every leader hits when they step into grading reform, and it's not the moment they expect. It's not when they introduce the idea. It's not when they share the research. It's not even when they start to see early implementation. It's the moment when someone pushes back and they feel it.
Yeah, that moment where the question hits you and you should be able to answer it clearly as a leader, but something inside of you hesitates.
And it's subtle. It's not always panic. Sometimes it's just a flicker of doubt.
Yeah, or you start softening your language and you start hedging your bets and you start to say things like, well, this is one approach to it.
Have you been watching me? That was 1,000% something I've said. And that's the moment. That's the moment where leadership and grading reform actually begins.
Okay, so let's start with the real problem. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about grading reform is that it's a technical problem, right? Like if we just get the grade book set up correctly, we're going to be fine. Or if we could just change the categories, or maybe we need to adjust the weighting. And once we do that, everything's going to fall into place.
Right. Like it's just a very simple analytical problem to solve.
Right. But it's not. It's actually a leadership problem.
And not leadership in the traditional sense either. Not the set the vision, chart the path, and people will follow. Because grading reform actually touches something much deeper.
It is one of the most emotionally charged, if not the most emotionally charged topics we've ever dealt with. I know I can speak to that for all these years, because it disrupts belief systems. It challenges what teachers and principals have done for years, sometimes for decades. And it challenges what parents think is fair. And it challenges what students have learned to navigate. They've figured out how to navigate the grading system. When you reform that, they feel like the rules to the game have changed.
Totally. So you're not just introducing a new approach. You're stepping into a space where people feel uncertain. They feel exposed and sometimes even threatened.
Yeah. And when leaders don't anticipate that, that's where things start to break down.
And this is where I think most leaders get stuck. They find themselves, I like to talk about this, caught in the middle.
I feel like you coined that term.
I think I actually did.
Caught in the middle,
I'm quoted from my time on the EduCrush podcast of quoting this idea of you don't just feel caught in the middle. You're not just a middle level leader. You become a middle child of education.
Yeah, I love that.
Misunderstood, forgotten, and just trying to make people hear you. And everybody is just determined to misunderstand you.
It's and is such when it comes to grading reform leadership, it's such the perfect way to describe it because on the one hand, like leaders know the current system isn't working the way it should. Like they've seen it. Grades don't reflect learning. They are sort of this mishmash or what Sue Burkhardt often calls the hodgepodge grade. Students are trying to game the system. Early struggles will permanently drag another student's mark down. It's just on and on it goes.
Totally. But on the other hand, they're getting pressure from staff. Questions like, is this fair? And what about accountability? And your favorite.
Of course.
What happens in the real world?
Yeah, you got to growl when you say that one. Wow, these kids get in the real world.
Totally.
Then parents come into the conversation, right? Because those conversations can feel even heavier because now it's not just professional for them, it's emotional. It's their kids.
Absolutely. So what happens is leaders start to adjust, not intentionally, not strategically, but reactively.
Right. So you start to soften your stance even accidentally, or sometimes you go the other way and you push so hard you get stuck in, and then you just try to hold the line and it becomes this contentious relationship.
Totally. And either way, something starts to erode.
Right. Credibility starts to erode, consistency starts to erode, clarity starts to erode.
And then the reform stalls, not because the ideas are wrong, but because the leadership is not there.
Right. And I think this is the hard truth.
Okay.
And it may be tough for leaders to hear. Most leaders don't lack conviction. Like most leaders who go into this grading reform work don't lack conviction. What they lack is a defensible process. You know, they feel boxed in by all the different angles. Everybody has a different agenda. Everybody has something at stake. Teachers are coming at them. District is coming at them. Parents are coming at them. Students are coming at them. Stakeholders in the community are coming at them. And they truly do feel caught in the middle of all of those tensions. And they feel like their process is not defensible. Yeah. So we should really talk about what strong leadership looks like.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So you said the word defensible process. That can sound a little abstract. So what does that actually look like in practice for you?
Well, for me, it comes down to the three things that I mentioned around what was eroding, and that is clarity, credibility, and coherence, right? So we have to have clarity before we develop consensus. If you as a leader start building consensus around grading reform, but nobody knows what exactly that means, where this is going, or what is the vision for what we're trying to accomplish, that's a problem. So the first one is clarity. And this is where I think we move too quickly. So without clarity, and I know, you know, Simon Sinek, it's a little cliche these days, like start with your why, but there really is something to that, you know, because understanding what the destination is going to create a more compelling case for why you want to move forward. So you have to be clear on what you're leading toward or why this reform is necessary.
Yeah, and that is such a big one. And I'm so glad you said that because I think consensus is something that feels good, just like we were talking about just previously on a different podcast. Collaboration is kind of exalted above all, especially if you're working in like a professional learning community space. You know, it's like you must collaborate. But there is a time where there needs to be a champion. There needs to be someone holding a vision.
For sure. And you can't build consensus on fuzzy thinking. Like if you don't deeply understand the intricacy, when I work with leaders, I often say to them, first and foremost, you have to know what you're talking about. Like if you don't understand, for example, why averaging distorts achievement, or if you don't understand why the mixing of behavior and achievement is distorted and why those two things need to be separated from a real clarity perspective, if you don't have a sort of intricate knowledge around why accuracy will matter more than a calculation, just because you have an accurate calculation doesn't mean you have accurate determination of a grade. So as a leader, you don't necessarily need to be the expert in the school, but you have to know enough to be able to have credible conversations with folks and be able to talk about some of these tensions. So because if you don't understand that, the moment someone pushes back, you're exposed and you're vulnerable.
100%. And people can feel it. They really can. Even if they can't quite articulate it, they can feel when something is not solid and then they'll keep pushing.
Exactly. And this is where that line comes in for me, is that if you can't explain it simply, you can't defend it under pressure.
That's so true.
Yeah.
Because sometimes what looks like resistance, you've told me this, is actually just a lack of clarity.
Totally.
Okay. So clarity is the first piece. We've just established that. And then the second thing that you said was credibility. So let's talk about that.
Okay. So credibility actually comes from consistency, not from what you say, but from what you reinforce.
Mm. Can you give an example of that?
Okay. So a leader says, for example, we are focusing on learning and we don't want grades to be a tool to coerce behavioral compliance or behavioral obedience.
Okay.
But then the leader gives a bit of a free pass to late penalties, zeros, averaging everything together. And so that's a mixed message. When you say in the faculty meeting, we're all about learning, but then you make allowances because you're under pressure and you give a release valve to that one teacher that's pushing back or the group that demands it, the certain department, et cetera. There's just a mixed message happening there as a leader.
Oh, yeah. And teachers will notice and they'll pick up on it immediately.
They notice it immediately. And every time that happens, it resets the culture.
Because now people don't know what actually matters.
Exactly.
Or what they really need to toe the line on.
And when people don't know what matters, they default to what's familiar, and that's going back to those antiquated practices that we're trying to reform.
That makes a lot of sense. And the third thing you brought up, Tom, was coherence. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So this actually might be the most important one. So we have clarity, we have consistency, and now we have coherence. The reason this is most important is because a lot of leaders think their job is to get people to comply.
Right. Like just do this because I said so.
Right. Because I'm the leader.
Yeah.
And sometimes, people sometimes will ask for it. They'll say, just tell us what to do. What I found over the course of my career is that as I gained more of a track record in the 3 schools within which I was an employee, where we were going about this grading reform business, by the time I got to the 3rd school, your reputation follows you in a school district. I found that in the 3rd school, more people were just simply asking me, like, what would you do, Tom? How would you handle this? As opposed to the 1st school where it was kind of, so people will ask you, and you could very easily say to them, just do it this way. And you could be that leader. But that's a quick fix. But that level of compliance, like do what Tom says, it doesn't create a belief system within them, right? So it's a quick fix. It's like short-term gain, but long-term pain, because when the people are just doing what you told them to do, the belief is shallow.
Right.
And the implementation is shallow.
Right.
And you want to build a deeper sort of connection to the work. And that's why you don't want to just tell people what to do.
So what does true coherence look like instead then?
It means the system makes sense, right?
Okay.
So it means we have a purpose and our grading practices align with that purpose. The messaging aligns with practices and the expectations align with what's being what's being reinforced, I should say.
And honestly, when things make sense to many teachers, resistance completely dissolves.
It does.
I mean, it doesn't totally disappear. I would say it shifts.
Right. And you experienced that in the school where you were leading grading reform a little bit, sort of the resistance and how it shifted. And
yeah, I would say it goes from like outright, like, I don't understand. Why are we doing this? I just like, it really is them saying to you, you hear it is, I don't want to change. I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
But what they're really telling you is, I don't understand. It doesn't make sense. It's not clear. And the more clear and overt you are about things, which was a big shift for me because I was like, adult learning spaces, we do it with each other, we discover it together. And they're like, one of my colleagues at the time, another instructional coach, pulled me aside and was like, it was a PD day. We actually trashed the plans. And she's like, just get up and talk to them. Just tell them. I was like, but that feels so wrong, like so lectury. She's like, they need to hear it.
Yeah.
They're floundering. Just tell them.
Yeah.
And do it with examples and pictures and graphics. And I just did it. And that was the day where it was like, oh, everything, it was like, oh, that makes sense. Like that totally aligns and I understand why and that's logical and that solves the problem. And I was like, oh, sometimes you just have to tell them.
Sometimes. And there is that fine line.
And there was a ton of consensus and collaboration. Don't get me wrong. But the point around it doesn't the shift then becomes not them acting as though they don't want to do it, but really being like, here's what I'm thinking of doing. Could you help me figure out X? And they ask much more targeted questions because they trust that you have the expertise to actually guide them through this and walk along them.
You're never going to eliminate it because, you have that many people, that many minds to change. I mean, a lot of times with grading reform, high schools are the last to change. Now, there's a cynical way to look at that, to say, well, the traditional high schools and all that. But there's also another side to that story, which is that high schools, first and foremost, at the most basic level, are usually larger, which means there's more faculty members, which means there's more minds to change, right? So it can take more time. And high schools do have to navigate things that middle schools, junior highs, and elementary schools don't. And one, of course, being the university transcript, right? And the other sometimes is about athletic eligibility or eligibility for extracurricular activities or, things like that come into play when kids are in high school that don't come into other aspects. So there are a lot of moving parts at the secondary high school level that maybe don't exist. So on the one hand, we might be able to look at a school and say, well, they're just so entrenched in their traditions. And that's fair for some schools. But then there's other schools where it's like there is a complexity to this that doesn't exist at the other levels. But the pushback is the work. Like we have to talk about pushback because it's going to happen. And it's where the pushback is where if leaders can reframe this and realize that pushback is actually the pressure test. This is where everything gets tested.
100%. And it's where many leaders misinterpret what's happening because they see pushback and think that something is wrong or that perhaps they made a mistake, but it's just a very real part of the process.
Exactly. But pushback isn't a sign of failure. It's a sign that you've actually reached the real work.
Okay, let's say more about that, Tom.
Okay, so if no one is pushing back, like if you're trying to institute grading reform, but no one's pushing back,
what have
you probably haven't disrupted anything meaningful. Like this is really, you're either doing it in the privacy of your office or you're not really disrupting anything meaningful, right? Because meaningful change is going to challenge people's assumptions. And when assumptions get challenged, people are going to respond.
Sometimes with questions, sometimes with what appears to be outright resistance, and sometimes with loud emotions.
Yeah, and that's where leadership has to show up. Not in avoiding these moments, but ultimately in how you navigate those moments.
Yeah, and it's just something I want to say here that you told me once that was so wise, and I still think of it to this day. It's about like people are stuck in something that's a lower version of themselves, a more comfortable version of themselves, and you're asking them to step into the discomfort. And one thing you told me, and I know we're going to get into a lot of practical moves here, is about it's just questions, right? Like asking the really honest question in that moment. It's like, so you just told me that you deeply value student learning, giving students more feedback and making sure that they're all successful, right? Yeah. And now you're also telling me you don't have the time to do it. Can I ask, what is a better use of your time than what we just discussed?
Yeah.
And sit in that awkwardness. Explain it. Because they have to have that aha moment that they are putting ridiculous, illogical blocks in the way of what they know they want to do. They want to do.
Yeah.
They're just blocking it.
Exactly. I think I've kind of coined an expression. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't, but it's something I say a lot when people say, well, that just seems like a lot of work. And I'm like, it's not a lot of work. It's the work. It's not a lot of work. This is the work we should be engaged in, which is, identifying learning targets and accurately reporting achievement and all of those things. So that's something that we have to really think about in terms of how we use our time and what is the priority. And it's a way to respectfully challenge the status quo in terms of how people use their instructional minutes. And you try to do it with some finesse, but it's an important thing to talk about.
Yeah. So let's really mine down into what a leader could do in these moments where someone comes to them and says, listen, all good in theory, but it's just not going to work in my classroom, or I don't have the time, or it's too much work, or whatever it may be.
Yeah, that's one of my pet peeve expressions. That's all well and good.
I know.
There's a few things we can do. I think that leaders often become too quick to defend. They rush to and defending is different than getting defensive, and rushing into being defensive is a problem. So when somebody shows some resistance, you want to get some clarity first.
That's a hard part.
It definitely is hard, but when you clarify, what you're trying to do with clarification is you're trying to slow down the conversation, which is ultimately going to take some of the emotion out of it, right? You make sure that you're responding to their actual concern, not just reacting to it. Yeah. The second thing you can do as a leader is don't avoid conflict. The most important thing to do with conflict is to structure it. Right. So you want to create space for dialogue, for questions, and even for tension, but you want to make sure you anchor all of that on principles.
That's so important, because then it's not just about people throwing their opinions or philosophies around.
Exactly. Like you don't want it to just be these philosophical debates, which are never ending circles of conversations that you can never resolve. How do you debate someone's opinion or their philosophy? You can just disagree with it, but there's really no resolution to it. The third thing that I think leaders can do is not to individualize everything.
Okay.
This isn't about one teacher's preference or one parent's concern. We have to be concerned about the integrity of the system.
That makes
and I think
a lot
you've
of
got to think
sense.
about that, not reacting to one person's pushback.
That happens so much,
It
right?
does.
One loud parent and they want to burn it down,
Yeah, they're
right?
demanding, they're pounding on the desk and all those things. And we
Exactly.
don't want to get reactive in that sense that every time somebody
Yeah.
comes in with a different opinion, we're shifting in a different direction.
Honestly, you've taught me so much. You were a great mentor back in the day when I was leading this work about really how to shift from that asking questions and clarifying, and then how to play the role of consultant when needed and give you're the king of one-liners. I have to say, if I could just sit and write a whole book of all the one-liners.
I wish I could remember them sometimes.
Yeah, they're there when you need them for sure. But this is what we're talking about is the real work. This is the real leadership of grading reform, and it's where the shift happens, because when a leader can move through these moments of tension and conflict, something really does change.
It does. It does for sure. They go from being reactive to being intentional. We talked earlier about they go from feeling defensive to actually feeling grounded.
Yeah. And it's in the way they respond. I mean, I know when you responded that way, when we brought you in and you spoke to our staff, I was like, oh my gosh, like the groundedness with which you spoke. What drove me nuts is I was struggling as a leader. I got red in the face. I said too much. I got defensive. I had read all your books. I was like using your words verbatim. You come in and speak and they're like, it just makes so much sense. But let's be honest, it was the tone and the groundedness with which you approached those moments. I still made it about me and got defensive, where you were like, it's about the idea and we're not going to lose sight of that.
One of my favorite expressions is experience comes from poor judgment. The reason I think I can speak so definitively about these things is because I've made all of these mistakes. You know, in my earlier days, I did get defensive. I did get emotional. I did get drawn into those types of things. And you just ultimately realize that it doesn't work. And I think as I grew into leadership, one of the best compliments I ever got from folks was my steadiness. Like I did not ebb and flow with people's emotional ebbs and flows. I tried to stay as steady as I could, because if you can stay steady, then you're not really relying on instinct or emotion anymore. You're kind of anchored in the process. Like that's a really important piece to get into.
Right. And that this is where that line comes back, right? Hard questions stop feeling like gut punches.
Right. And they start becoming guardrails.
Yes, that is such a powerful shift, because now the questions are helping you refine the work, not just derail it altogether.
Right. And I think leaders, we want to double tap, as the kids say.
Oh, so hip.
Just think about that again, leaders. We get so defensive about questions and challenges and pushback rather than seeing them as gut punches. If we saw them as guardrails about people's concerns and making sure that there's a container, and within that container, we have a lot of flexibility and a lot of options for us. But if you start seeing the pushback as guardrails, you're going to see the questions differently. So I think the big takeaway for me is this: grading reform doesn't fail because the ideas are wrong. It fails, unfortunately, when leaders don't have the clarity and the credibility to defend those ideas when it matters the most.
And this is not easy work, folks. It's layered, it's complex, and it's not something leaders should feel like they have to figure out all on their own.
No. So if you're listening to this episode and you're thinking, yeah, honestly, Tom and Nat, this is exactly where I am. Like that space of being caught in the middle, trying to move something forward, but not always feeling fully equipped to defend it. Just know that's actually the work.
And you don't have to do it alone.
No, you don't have to do it on your own. And honestly, that's a lot of what we've been doing with leaders lately, just walking alongside them as they build that clarity and that defensible process.
So if that's something you're looking for, we've put a little bit more information together.
Yeah, in the show notes, you can check that out and see a little bit more about what we're talking about. There's no pressure, but it is something we're offering at CAC. If that's helpful, it's there for you. If it's not, then I'm sure there's other ways that you can lead this work.
Okay, that's it for this week. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Assess That.
And don't forget to follow Assess That on Twitter, Instagram. We've got links in the show notes for all of those platforms.
And if you have any specific topics that you'd like us to talk about, please DM us on either one of those platforms.
And a reminder to check the show notes for links for the upcoming professional learning events that we have. We've mentioned those before, and there'll be more links in the show notes.
Mm-hmm. And again, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, as that really helps us to grow this podcast's reach.
And finally, if you like what you're hearing, please keep spreading the word about the podcast to your friends, your colleagues, or on social media. We would really appreciate that.
And remember, assessment isn't just a tool, it's a conversation.
And together, we're here to make it a better one.
See you in 2 weeks, everyone.